Good evening. Tonight we are joined by one of the most respected constitutional lawyers in the United States, Professor Bruce Fein, member of the Impeachment Committee of the US Congress. He has spent decades examining presidential power, the limits of government, and America's role in global security. His experience inside the US Department of Justice and his long record of legal analysis make him a key voice at a moment when the world is facing overlapping crises. Before we begin, I want to express my gratitude to Mr. Anastas Terzobaliev for his support and contribution to diplomatic work. His assistant made this conversation possible. Professor Fein, thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
I have a lot of questions for you, but let's start with this one. How has the idea of the New World Order changed last 10 years?
But I don't think there ever was really a new world order. I think, politicians deal with euphemisms, but the world order, to the extent that it's maintained stability, it traces back to Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. You can use various adjectives to describe that. It's basically a version of might makes right. But we've always had clashes. War has been the scourge of the species for thousands of years. And I do think that there was some, period during the Cold War where there was some stability. There was unity in NATO, and then you had the Warsaw Pact, and there was kind of equilibrium of terror with nuclear weapons. It didn't mean that the world was perfect, but you didn't have crises every day like you see today. One example being, of course, the recent attack against Iran, the instability it's created throughout not only the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, but because of the supply chains and the interconnection of the world, we're finding ramifications globally with regard to prices, starvation, instability in other countries. The sovereign wealth funds may diminish, and those sorts of things. But I do believe that the idea that there was a new world order in any sense that human beings changed, that their lust for power changed, that their craving for peace changed. No, it's like suggesting that there's new DNA, that double helix isn't really what it used to be. And that means we have to deal with reality. We do have this human condition that we have to deal with, and it's not necessarily an easy one, because we do find universally among the species this craving for power, domination. I get my self-esteem out of having slavery. I mean, we think there's been more of mankind when slavery has been present, when slavery hasn't existed, even though it does have some sporadic, I think, existences in Mauritania, elements even in Africa today. And so the idea that without using our brains and being very, very skillful at trying to, what we call, create equilibriums and not having any unchecked power, that, that's what's needed. And to just stand up and say there was a new world order, there wasn't. That was the phrase that was George H.W. Bush coined when we went into Kuwait, if you will, after Saddam Hussein attacked in 1990, then we had the 1991 war. But wars didn't end at that particular time. We've had clashes and ongoing even genocide since then. I think there's a genocide in Gaza today. There's genocide in Myanmar. It's often thought that the Chinese are committing genocide against the Uyghurs and Tibetans. You have horrible things happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I stand up in Sudan, where I used to work. There's a genocide, a civil war there. I don't understand where this new world order is. If it is, I don't want it. It's not any better than the old order.
Yes.
So that's what I say these things just so that we can be open-eyed about this. I think we get distracted with these illusions that somehow there's going to be a deus ex machina is going to turn the world into the Prince of Peace and we're going to find it someplace. It isn't going to happen because the DNA is not inclined towards peace as opposed to war. But we can diminish, the horrors of conflict if we use our brains and we try to elicit what I call the better angels of ourselves. And that's what we needed to be focused on, not these glib phrases that are used by politicians but are completely meaningless.
And does the United States, in this context, project stability today or uncertainty?
No, it's it's uncertainty. You would understand, Bulgaria, you're part of NATO.
Yeah.
We have the President of the United States going to another member of NATO, Denmark, and saying, we're going to take over Greenland. Really? What's going on? That would have been unheard of, just 3 or 4 years ago. Now, any country could feel, President of the United States says, we'll go into your country. We went into Venezuela. We kidnapped the president of Venezuela with military force. We killed 50, 60 in the process. That individual now is, being subject to trial in Manhattan, in New York, and not said that he's the only one. We've threatened Cuba to do the same thing, have regime change in Cuba, maybe Panama, maybe Colombia. We've bombed Nigeria.
What is the situation with Maduro now? And what's the perspective?
Well, I mean, I got involved at one point.
Yeah.
I do think that, the trial is ongoing. The big issue is, are we freezing the assets of Venezuela? Who's going to pay for his defense? And we really don't know, even in Venezuela itself.
You were part of his defense, or?
Well, there was a period of time. I don't want to go into the details.
Okay.
But right now, even in Venezuela, what's the stability there? President Trump says we're in control, and we're going to hold elections when we feel like it. But then the Venezuelan successor to Maduro says, wait a minute, it's still Venezuela. It's our country. We sell their oil and keep the money. So no one really knows, what is the legal architecture, if there is any, in Venezuela today. It's completely unstable, which is why you don't have any investment in Venezuela. Who's go into a country like that, where you don't know whether your property could be nationalized or expropriated in the next 3 or 4 days? But that's just an example. If you believe that to be engaged, and I don't believe that Maduro himself was selling fentanyl, and to the extent Venezuela was involved in drug trafficking, you know who the recipients are? You. Europeans were getting this, not the United States. So why are we going to Venezuela? Because you're selling drugs? Well, Mexico, then the next going to be on the list. And the origins of the fentanyl that Trump seems to be so exercised about, it's in China. You're going to go after President Xi, So it's completely irrational and irregular. So no one really knows, what's the next step of the United States, which was true when we decided, okay, we'll attack Iran. Maybe we got encouraged by Israel, but even without Israel, we may attack Iran, because now we've said that unless they renounce all of their nuclear ambitions, and I don't know how you can tell a country to do that. You can always have secret programs. Then we'll keep bombing them. We'll wipe out their civilization for 6,000 years. Does he really mean it? He's already said we've already won the war. But the next day we haven't won the war. And now we're negotiating Islamabad. The next day we're not negotiating Islamabad. Now they're running victory laps. The next day we're not. I mean, no one has ever seen anything like this irregularity, this swing in the pendulum, every 24 hours. Nobody knows what Mr. Trump is going to say. The next day we see him in the garb of Jesus Christ. Now, the second coming without Jesus, maybe the New Testament has been fulfilled. So it's that kind of, I think, erratic behavior that makes the world very, very unstable, and everybody is nervous. No one really knows, what to plan in the long, any kind of long-term capacity, because the United States is no longer a constant. We're a variable, and it's not a variable every year or two. It's a variable every 24 hours.
What about these Euro-Atlantic values? These were philosophy very long time for us, for you.
Yeah. Well, that's where I think that the greatest, I think, alteration in the United States has been, whether or not you talk about treaties in individual instances, there was a common recognition of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. You should have, free and fair elections, that we're working towards international peace. We want to have free trade, and we want to have common values with regard to due process. We give people fair trials. There's a presumption of innocence. These are the building blocks of Western civilization. That isn't even true anymore. I mean, we don't even give immigrants due process. We ship them into torture chambers in El Salvador. Really? And then we bribe other countries to take refugees. Cameroon one day, Zimbabwe the next day. Anybody who will pay us money will ship immigrants to places where they haven't lived any time of their entire lives. So these values have been altered, and that's why we have the oddity of the United States telling Europeans, not only Bulgaria, but Germany and France or England, hey, you're not having enough suppression of speech that we don't like. Running contrary to free speech. Well, you need to suppress any content that criticizes President Trump. Why? This is freedom of speech. As long as they're not resorting to violence, this is the way that politics works. You have diversity of views, you have free and fair elections. That's gone out the window. And I think that's why even in the United States, there's suspicion cast over elections. And we have the oddity of, we have our vice president serving as the proxy of our president, walking into Hungary and saying, well, I'm going to campaign for Viktor Orban. Really? I mean, that's unheard of, previously. That would be open and notoriously trying to manipulate the outcome of elections
abroad. Is it the first time happening this way? This influence?
I think it's too broad to say it's the first time, at least because earlier we did it covertly. We had the CIA. We supported the Christian Democrats in Italy, but it was subtle. But in this time, it's open and notorious. We're sending the Vice President of the United States, hey, you need to vote for Viktor Orban because he'll suppress the speech that we don't like, and he praises President Trump. Maybe he'll nominate Trump for another Nobel Peace Prize like Pakistan, stuff like that. So there's a huge now divergence for the first time at least, since NATO was formed in 1949, and certainly even more so after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, of, hey, are we common, at least with regard to the values that we cherish, and having the government by the consent of the governed? We may not all be, clones of each other, but the basic fundamentals are the same. And that simply isn't true anymore. And I think it's an unfortunate thing. Part of our xenophobia in the United States is like an infectious disease. It's carried over, I think, into many countries in Europe. You find it AfD in Germany, and certainly it's part of Viktor Orban, maybe a little bit in Poland in the prior administration, the ones that were voted out of office at the last election. And I think, again, that's very unhealthy. The fact is that I think peace is promoted by immigration as long as we make sure that the immigrants that come in, they're assimilated, they believe in the rule of law, they believe in industry and working, they believe in freedom of religion, toleration, free speech. There's nothing wrong with immigrants. In the United States itself, it's a country of immigrants. We created it. Nobody there of anybody who's there. Well, yeah, I was born in, go trace back your ancestry. No, they're born mostly in Europe, but sometimes they're born in Asia, sometimes they're born in Latin America. So what? If you believe in the American system, you are an American. So say, America, the only country in the world, was created by an idea, not by an ethnicity, not by a religion, not by a gender, not by a tribe, an idea. The dignity of every individual. That the goal here is to secure these unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. These are the things that made us unique in the history of the world. No other country had this idea of equality of everybody. Everyone else, stratified society, hierarchies, you're born into nobility, or you're born into a caste system or whatever. Totally unfair system, unjust, because no one is morally accountable for their parents. When you're born, you don't have any control over that. And this is the idea, well, we want to try to diminish any distinctions based merely by the accident of birth. And now we're going back, no, if you're not white, Anglo-Saxon American, you're really not part of the United States. And the only group in all of the United States today who has refugee status, white Afrikaners in South Africa, who can come in. The ones who plundered blacks of trillions of dollars of diamonds and gold over the centuries, and they're the ones that get refugee status. I mean, it's crazy unless you think, oh, this is kind of a light version of the master race theory of the Third Reich. There isn't any master race. We're all individual human beings. It'd have to be judged individually. You don't have collective judgments. We're not collectively good or collectively bad. We're individuals who need to be assessed based upon what we do and can be accountable for our own actions. I say that is the heartland of Western civilization, and we're losing that right now.
How do you interpret the shooting last week against Trump's administration?
Well, I think it's not highly irregular. I mean, I was around when there were about 3 or 4 attempts on President Gerald Ford's life. You didn't have any against, really against Barack Obama, although he was the first black ever elected. And given still elements of white racism, you'd figure there might be attempts on his life. But this recent incident in the Washington Hilton Hotel, I mean, I've been there many times, he really didn't get through even the outer perimeter. So there wasn't any particular time where you would say that the president was really endangered, his life was endangered. He'll be, obviously, he's already been charged, with threatening and attempting to kill, an official. But I think it's a short-term event. Now, let's, however, consider something that goes in tandem with this, which has an opposite message, that the president has indicted the former FBI director of threatening his life by going on the internet and putting up some numbers there. No one even thought, threatening his life. This is something of FBI director who was serving under who? Donald Trump, He was a Republican appointee, not a Democrat appointee. He was the one, basically, who benefited Trump in 2016. We're in the last phase of the election. He said we're reopening the investigation of Hillary Clinton, who's the rival of Trump. So that helped Trump. And yet Trump saying he was trying to kill me? Now, anybody who knows James Comey, and I know James Comey, it's an absurdity. And he's saying, oh, that was an assassination attempt that he was harboring to undertake. So it shows you how these ideas are totally manipulated. It's very unfortunate because it becomes propaganda. It doesn't become news like we're hearing that has any connection with reality. And then that turns us more and more towards China and Russia and less towards where the United States originated, as a country of freedom and liberty.
Can we say then that the President Trump is gaining politically from these attacks?
No, I believe this recent attack, I think that's so cynical. I don't think there's going to be benefit. I think it'll be neutral, it'll be phased out. I believe it would have been different if there was some credible, actually, threat to his life. It wasn't like he shot and somebody dodged the bullet like some of the earlier assassination attempts when he was campaigning in 2024. But this is so remote. It's one-page story. And now the headlines in the United States are, you indicted former FBI director trying to kill you, Did anybody knows James Comey knows it's a complete joke? This is at the same time, by the way, where his daughter, Comey's daughter, was fired. She was a prosecutor trying to drive down crime from New York. So now she's suing the Trump administration for illegal firing because she didn't do anything wrong. And so it just looks like, an internal spat here, which I don't think is going to benefit Donald Trump. Because anybody who knows Comey and his daughter, whatever else, you don't have to agree with them. No, they're not out to overthrow the United States. They're not out to use force and violence to have a military coup d'etat or anything like that. And this is really a misuse, if you will, of political power to try to punish dissent or people who Trump doesn't like. He really is somebody who's very, very childish and vindictive. He went and publicly disagreed with the wife of Charlie Kirk. He was the young person who was assassinated. And the wife comes in and says, well, I can forgive, the perpetrator. We need to move forward. Trump immediately follows the wife. He says, that's not me. I don't forgive anybody. I'm going to get vengeance against my opposition. This is the person who purports to read the Sermon on the Mount in Jesus every day. That doesn't sound like the Sermon on the Mount to me. It's the opposite of that. So this is why I do not believe that these recent incidents politically are going to benefit Mr. Trump.
Let's look to the Middle East. A State Department memo says Epic Fury was launched at Israel's request. What does this reveal about transparency inside the administration and the influence of foreign actors in U.S. politics?
Well, the influence of foreign actors depends upon who the foreign country is. I believe at present we've alienated every country in the world except Israel. But Israel was highly influential well before Mr. Trump. It was highly influential with the Biden administration, where we were selling them huge weapons because the genocide in Gaza began under the Biden administration. And part of the reason why Israel has, I believe, very, very pronounced influence in U.S. politics, because we have a very large group, not of Jews, but we call evangelical Christians, and believe that Israel has to acquire all of the land of Canaan in the Old Testament before we'll have the second coming of Jesus and the Prince of Peace, and therefore Israel needs to spread itself not just into Gaza and the West Bank. They need to take over Lebanon, which they're doing already, any place south of the Litani River. They need to take over Syria, maybe parts of eastern Turkey, and then we'll have the second coming. And so they're a very, very strong political voice in the United States. And I say it's not just Mr. Trump, but Mr. Biden also was following, I believe, Israel when it came to supporting the genocide in Gaza. Now, at that point, I don't believe that the Biden administration was in favor of attacking Iran. I do think Mr. Trump is closer to Prime Minister Netanyahu than Biden was. But I think that we could have gone, there were voices calling for us to invade Iran well before Israel decided, hey, this is our chance to try to get rid of our enemy, based upon the fact that they may have an ambition for nuclear weapons to offset Israel's 300 or 400 nuclear warheads. So that's unfortunate, but I'll tell you this, knowing Mr. Trump and how he's reacted to second term, Israel will be sold down the river in a second like any other country. All Trump is about is what is in it for him. And he could abandon Israel in a moment if he thought it would help him politically, and he thought that they were bringing them down. That's why, in some sense, when you think about the recent negotiations, if you want to call them, in Islamabad, Israel doesn't have a seat at the table. Why not? If they're part of the attack, Israel's nowhere in sight. I don't think Netanyahu wants the war. He doesn't want ceasefire. He needs the war to stay in power because he's got a criminal prosecution underway. And he's running and claiming, you can't change prime ministers in the middle of the war. You got to keep me, no matter how guilty he is of fraud and bribery or whatever. So Israel, we're not on the same page with Israel on everything. We are in some respects, but in other respects, we're going to do what we want to do, irrespective of what Netanyahu or Israel wants. So it is an influence, but it's not going to be decisive by any means. We need Israel in part because we've alienated every other country in the world. We've alienated all of Europe, told them, well, you open the Strait of Hormuz, not us. You take care of that problem that we created, and then chastise the Europeans because you're not rectifying the problem that he created. And that obviously creates resentment everywhere. And moreover, Trump uses it's a very vile language to attack every leader. I think that I don't know how long your new leader will be in office before Trump uses some vile language. You're weak. You're anemic. I mean, he even goes after the Pope, and says, "Oh, he's weak. He's somehow in cahoots with all these forces against me." And that means that I think that the ability of any foreign country to influence our foreign policy is diminished. It's Trump, whatever he feels like doing on that particular day.
You have said that no one in the White House actually believed that Iran posed a real threat to the United States. How does that align with the scale of this operation?
The scale of the operation need not correspond at all, to the nature of the threat. So if you're trying to create at least the appearance of urgency, you use huge numbers of weapons and military far greater than is necessary to win. You can think about that, even to the extent that we had 90,000 troops in Afghanistan, 500,000 in Vietnam, and we did the same kind of what I call threat inflation when it came after 9/11 and international terrorism. I mean, we had staggering billions of dollars all over the world trying to capture and do these waterboarding of the so-called terrorists. We sent them to Guantanamo Bay. Really? The reason why we had to invent Guantanamo Bay, the threat was so tiny. And what's the threat that happens once every 50 years? Is that an ongoing threat? 9/11 happened. It was a terrible tragedy. I call it was murder 3,000. But we initially prosecuted the first person involved in 9/11 as 3,000 counts of murder. It wasn't war. They don't have the ability to conduct war. It was a one-day incident, right? And they've never attacked the United States for the last 25 years, You don't fight wars when you have one battle every 25 years. That's not wartime. But we use forces that are vastly disproportionate because we have to create the appearance that this is a huge danger. So we have our navies there and aircraft carriers, and we have, I think there are even flights from Bulgaria that fly and bomb into Iran because we have U.S. airplanes here. So what shows is that the government treats a flea as an elephant because they have to make the appearance. Oh wow, how dangerous this is, and we have all these military people have to be there. We have to have the aircraft carriers there, and that's why there's even been flirtation with using nuclear weapons against Iran. Well, they're that dangerous. But it certainly has no correspondence to the idea that Iran attacked the United States. In its history, never attacked. I mean, Iran is one country that has more stable boundaries than any other country in Europe. It's been the same for over 2 centuries. They're not invading other countries. I mean, we fomented the Iraq attack on Iran in 1980. It had an 8-year war. Iran has its own internal problems with ethnic divisions. It's not trying to run and invade other countries, certainly not the United States. If there's any country that's trying to interfere with another country's affairs, it's the U.S. into Iran. It goes back to the 1953 overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh, who was a secular person, because we liked the Shah of Iran, really, and we thought that Mossadegh had nationalized the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Nationalized means we paid just compensation based upon an arbitral tribunal, but this is what other countries do. But it was really because, in my view, we did this as a favor to the British, who said, well, we need our economic clause into Iran because otherwise we'll follow into a third-rate power because we need the oil in order to support, global projection of the British Empire. But the empire vanished anyway, even with regard to the overthrow. But even since that time, we trained Savak, which is the Iranian version of the Gestapo, under the Shah, committed brutal crimes, including torture and disappearances. That created the 1979 revolution that brought in what I call the radicals, that are probably a different version of the Shah. They steal money, they're brutal, but hey, we're the one that created the conditions because we crushed the only really democratic dispensation in Iranians' history for our own ulterior motives. So the idea that Iran confronting United States with 5,000 nuclear warheads, Israel with at least 300 to 400, Iran hasn't anything. Who's threatening who? It's absurd to say Iran's threatening the other. No, the other countries are existential threats to Iran. Iran is not an existential threat to U.S. or Israel, not even close. But it shows that fear is something that is, I think, endemic to the species, and it's very easy to make people frightened to death of even a small risk. And politicians play on that factor, that weakness, if you can, in the human condition. If I tell you and all the audience out there, the likelihood in the United States of you being killed by an international terrorist attack is less than being killed because a vending machine fell on your head when you were buying a Coke, right? It's like 1 in 45. It is so unrisky, if you will. And yet, we act like, oh, there's going to be a 9/11 every day. It hasn't happened in 25 years. It's not going to happen. The risk is that tiny. But it is the nature of the politicians and the empire. You got to make people think, the sky is falling down. And then you'll put up all the money. Otherwise, if you went to an American right now, a citizen, would you like to vote $1 billion a day to go fight in Iran instead of spending money on food stamps to people and children who need food? They say, no way, that's stupid. We'll buy the food for these people. Why are you spending $1 billion to attack Iran? But you give it to the politicians, have these ulterior motives. They get big political contributions from the defense establishment. Yeah, they do, or at least they acquiesce, in that kind of expenditure. Now, Trump may find what I would call his Waterloo, because Congress is resisting. Why are we spending all these billions? Nothing's in it for them, because they don't get any credit, because they're not going to be viewed as the lion who's going to tame Iran. Members of Congress are totally anonymous in this exercise, and they may say, we're not giving the money anymore, and that's the only way, I think, that the war could be brought to an end. But it goes back to your major question. Iran, a threat to the United States, is 6,000 miles away. They can't even get across the Atlantic Ocean. So this is a complete fabrication in order to justify war for the sake of war.
Politico described Bulgaria as an obedient ally, linking it to US action in Iran, a claim our Prime Minister denied. Is this diplomatic nuance, political pressure, or media framing?
No, I mean, President Trump has a penchant for saying all sorts of outrageous things that are just false. You know, he said, for example, that Iran has agreed to all of his demands. Iran said, we haven't agreed to anything. So Mr. Trump says whatever he feels like. It says he's an ally one day and then not an ally the next day. I certainly believe he would impute, any particular position to the Bulgarian prime minister because it makes it look like, okay, we have an alliance, whether it's true or not. And he doesn't even care whether he's called out and shown to be a liar. So unfortunately, this is just, I wouldn't pick it out Bulgaria. He'll say that somebody else is supporting him as well. That'll be denied the next day. That's because Trump lives in a world, maybe partially because, he's a business guy and he thinks that words are reality, that he thinks it's just the images in the words that count. Let me go back to one incident that I think brings to mind this kind of feature, this trait in Mr. Trump. When he had his first impeachment trial, remember this so-called infamous telephone call with President Zelensky in Ukraine, in which basically Trump was saying, okay, we'll transport the weapons to you, but you have to announce an investigation against Joe Biden, who was probably the candidate who would oppose Trump, which happened in 2020. He said, listen, you don't actually have to open an investigation. Just say that you have. That's good enough. You just have to say it. So he lives in this world where if you just say things, they become reality in his mind, and for his group, the MAGA supporters, they'll believe it because people said it, whether it has any relation to reality. It's just like his claim. This is not long ago. Trump was saying with his subordinates, oh, the Haitians are eating cats and dogs as dessert in Springfield, Ohio. Really? Are you kidding? Where is it? Well, it didn't matter because this is playing on xenophobia, Okay, the Haitians are trashy people. I don't want to use vile language but that he would use to describe them. But that's the world he lives in. And you wake up and who knows? The next day he'll say, well, Bulgaria is now in alliance with Iran or with the new supreme leader, the son of the old supreme leader that the United States assassinated. You just got to be prepared for that. And all I can say is, if you wait 24 hours, don't worry, it's a new day for Trump. It'll change. The climate will change.
It doesn't sound secure.
No. It means you have to be very, very agile to be able to respond, almost like to improvise your foreign policy every 24 hours. I wonder how Trump is feeling today. And that's what happens when you have, say, all the power now. It's not just under Trump, it's migrated to the White House and Congress. The other voices have very, very, if any, influence on what he does and says. Just says, listen, I'm president, so I'll do whatever I feel like I want to do. And that's why he was actually boasting to the New York Times a couple months ago. He said, the only thing that constrains me is my moral conscience. Constitution? No. International law? No. Decency? No. Just my moral conscience. And this is a guy who doesn't have a moral conscience, other than he doesn't want to upset his narcissism. So we already know that he believes he is omnipotent, if you will. He does exercise, in his own mind, the exercises of a king, a monarch, and he treats other people or foreign leaders the same way.
Under the U.S. Constitution, is impeachment of President Trump possible, and under what conditions? Yeah,
just for the audience here, what does our Constitution say about impeachment? It was debated at a Constitutional Convention. We had a very famous statesman named Ben Franklin. It says impeachment is a substitute for tyrannicide, right? So you don't kill a tyrant, but this is a civilized way that you have a process by which you determine whether the president is a trustworthy steward of our liberties. So the way it works under our Constitution is you need a majority of our House of Representatives, there are 435 members who are elected every 2 years, to vote articles of impeachment. Now, I actually have drafted 13 articles of impeachment myself that have been introduced by Congressman John Larson of Connecticut. It's called House Resolution 1155. Anybody who has an internet and goes House Resolution 1155, you'll be able to read what those articles of impeachment are. Then it has to be approved by a majority. So if you have 435, it means you have to have at least 218 votes. Now, right now, the House is closely divided between Democrats and Republicans. I don't know whether you have 218 votes right now. Maybe you do. It's close. And it may change in November because there'll be new elections. Right now, the tide could turn in favor of Democrats after November. But let's assume that there are articles of impeachment that are voted. Then you have managers. There's a trial before the U.S. Senate. There are 100 members of the Senate. They serve 6-year terms. In a trial, the Chief Justice of the United States presides. That would be Chief Justice John Roberts. And then there would be presentation of evidence, and ultimately the Senate would need to vote by 2/3 majority, which would be you need 67 votes out of 100 in order to convict. If what results, it's not like the guillotine in the French Revolution. It just means the president leaves office. You can't assume power anymore. Otherwise, he can go to Mar-a-Lago and do whatever else. He can go golf, what he wants to do, or he can do cryptocurrencies or all the other things that Trump is engaged in. And I'm sure he'll want to devote time to his presidential library, but that's how the system works. Trump has been impeached twice in his first term. They didn't have the 2/3 vote in the Senate to convict. I think one of the reasons why the second impeachment trial, based upon the January 6th attack on the Capitol, was after he had already left office. And the reason why there was a trial was that if he was convicted, he couldn't run for office again. But after that, his loss to Joe Biden in 2020, it was thought in the United States that Trump he's over the hill politically. He's not going to come back anyway. Why are you going to convict him? Just going to create turmoil. And if he's not going to be in politics anymore, who cares? Just let him go. But he didn't. Yeah, he kind of returned like Napoleon from Elba, but ends up with Waterloo. And so that's why this time around, no one's going to be under the delusion that Trump's going away. We either have to remove him from office or we're going to have to try to survive the next 2 years with all the things that he's been doing, the illegal criminal wars of aggression, usurping the powers of the Congress in various sundry ways, throwing people into dungeon in foreign countries in violation of our immigration laws, suppressing freedom of speech, naming everything that he incite in Washington, D.C. after himself, putting pictures up there, Trump at the Kennedy Center, Trump at the World Institute of Peace. Pretty soon my passport is going to have a picture of Trump in it right now. And that maybe I'll throw my passport away. Trump is on the federal buildings there. There's Trump, the Labor Department. It's just literally a block from my offices. You walk by, there's a huge picture, Donald Trump. It's like going to Beijing and seeing Mao Zedong, or going into Pyongyang and seeing the North Korean. Yeah. So that's what. But anyway, impeachment and conviction is what would be needed to remove Trump from office. I think it's credible that will happen. It's not by any means certain, but I think the economic turmoil that's been created by the attack on Iran, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But it's not that going in and kidnapping and abducting the president of Venezuela and saying we're in control and no one knows what's going to happen there. And we could go into any other country as well, including Greenland. Maybe he'll say, okay, I have to go into Greenland, even as part of NATO, if he feels that he wants it because it makes him feel that he owns more property. He may do that. I say this is not a person who you can kind of deduce future decisions based upon reasoning. How would a reasonable person do things? This is not a person who uses reason. In some sense, he shoots himself in the foot every day. Even if you wanted to be a king, why would you tell the New York Times, I can do anything I want? You try to keep it secret a little bit. He advertises it everywhere in the public domain, and he doesn't shrug his shoulders or doesn't worry about any of this. And maybe that's because he really doesn't care about anything other than, the narcissism and what in the short run, he feels powerful because he's in the White House.
Could Vladimir Putin be a strategic partner for the United States now, or he's a long-term danger?
Well, I think it's ad hoc, and I think the question needs to be dissected. Let's think about World War II. You remember, were we an ally of the Soviet Union or not? Remember at the outset, you had the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. So Soviet Union was the enemy because they came in and they took part of Poland, they took part of Romania, they probably would have gobbled up Bulgaria too. But then Hitler attacked the Soviet Union and Barbarossa in 1941. And then everything changed. First, Soviet Union is the enemy. Remember, was fighting Finland at that time. Now we're allies. Then we had propaganda. Oh, Uncle Joe Stalin, he's a nice, kindly uncle, avuncular person, you know, even though put in the gulag and millions had died. I think it's documented, probably at least 10 million that he's killing. So, okay, well, are we an ally or not? I mean, we gave huge amounts of weapons to the Soviet Union at the Lend-Lease program. They couldn't have fought the Nazis without our weapons. We said, okay, now we're friendly to you. And in the American media, oh, Joe Stalin was a friendly person, and we shouldn't be angry at him. So when you say, are we allied with Putin or not allied with Putin? I mean, it may well be, we don't know, that Putin has what we call blackmail information on Mr. Trump. I mean, Mr. Trump is not a choir boy. Anybody who would associate with Jeffrey Epstein has got something that's wrong with them. You're even associating with somebody that preys on underage women? Really? But we know he did. We don't know the full extent. But it wasn't just Mr. Trump, but others. And that may be that Trump is envious that Putin has all the power in the world. He doesn't have to have real elections. And we could, in an ad hoc basis, have Putin a partner. We know that after the war opened and the Strait of Hormuz shut, we gave Russia an exemption from the sanctions that we imposed because of the Ukraine war. Now we can sell oil at higher prices and get more money. So the whole thing is totally convoluted. Everyone is maneuvering, and the alliances are there in 24 hours, and then it shifts. But I don't see that in the long run we would have any kind of alliance with Russia comparable to what we say earlier with NATO. There are two differences in the cultures. But it doesn't mean on ad hoc basis we could help Russia in some respects, maybe withhold some weapons from Ukraine, maybe not. If Putin wants it done. We have rivalry with Putin over Syria, if you will, in other places as well. But that it may mean, however, that on certain instances we'll end up allied with Putin like we were with Joe Stalin in World War II if we think it's useful for us. But I think right now, if we look after our attack on Iran, Russia and China, overtly or covertly, are going to help Iran. Because Iran, they believe, and I think it's going to be our second Vietnam. It's going to be a quagmire. We don't know how to get out. We don't know how to get in. It's 80 or 90 million people. It's not like Venezuela, a little tiny country. There's no way and we can't occupy Iran. We have no clue how we're supposed to run them. What's the end game here? That's why we don't even know what the reason, what's victory. And Trump says, well, they're going to renounce all nuclear weapons. I don't care what they say. What counts is, can you monitor that? How are you going to monitor the development of nuclear weapons? Unless you have people, armed forces there, that shut down all the research and kill all their scientists. That's not going to happen. And moreover, even if that were true with regard to Iran, we know, given realpolitik, China and Russia want the U.S. to get sucked into Iran. They're going to provide aid overtly or covertly to let Iran fight. That's what happened when we were fighting Vietnam. It was Vietnam fighting on its own. China was helping and Russia was helping. Why? Because on the larger chessboard, China and Russia were opposed to the United States. China and Russia still opposed to the United States being the one hegemon, if you will, of the whole world. So they're going to help out Iran no matter what. And then maybe afterwards they would abandon Iran, but in the short run. There's no way that we can win in Iran. And that's the folly of believing, and many of the advisors said, oh, you're going to Iran, there'll be an upsurge. They'll overthrow, the supreme leader. Come on. I mean, that's the delusion we had in Cuba for 70-some years. Oh, we're going to go in to overthrow Castro, to overthrow the Cuban regime. Didn't happen. Didn't overthrow anything. Even with regard to Venezuela, we go into Venezuela, oh, Maduro's a bad guy. You still have the same people running the country. They haven't overthrown anything because their underlying dynamics of politics haven't changed. And that's what I think Iran is going to be a complete disaster for the United States. It's akin to, I think, the stupidity of the Soviet Union invading in Afghanistan in 1979. Really? Afghanistan? Afghanistan is an existential threat to Soviet Union? It's absurd. They just did it. Hey, we can. We like our guy into Afghanistan. But this is the folly of all these empires that believe that, oh, if you can stand territorially, it makes you stronger. Not necessarily. It can make you weaker if the territory you're trying to expand to is very hostile. And I think that's what's going to happen in Iran. I think you can call ceasefire, but they're really fragile ceasefires. We've had ceasefires in Gaza, but it looks the same. Ceasefire right now in Lebanon, it looks the same. You call it a ceasefire, but it really isn't. The wars and the bombs continue. And right now, there's not even close to a chance that we are in different negotiating universes of Iran in the United States. Not even close. We can't even agree on whether we got water in the cups in terms of what's supposed to be negotiated. I mean, Iran is asking, no, you got to pay reparations for all the damage you've done to the economy. Reparations? Well, we're telling we've already won. You have to do everything we tell you to do. So they're not even talking in the same plane. And you can see why politically there's no harmony, there's no convergence that they get from trying to negotiate anything like the other side would accept. And I go back to the fact that, and trying to put myself in the position of Iran, not necessarily, and I don't applaud their regime at all, but if I'm looking at their survival, in every country in the world, self-preservation is kind of the norm. It's not unique to Iran. Every country wants self-preservation. Iran looks around and says, wait a minute. We have no nuclear weapons. Israel is our enemy. They got 300 or 400. There are no inspections on Israel facilities, zero. U.S. has 5,000 nuclear warheads. There are no inspections of them. And you're telling us we can't have a nuclear weapon in order to deter your invasion, and it's got to be subject to inspections? Who does that? That's not going to happen, especially when they see that having a nuclear weapon works, because they look at North Korea. North Korea has nuclear weapons. They are more brutal than Iran. They shoot. They are so bad, they don't even get an uprising. Everybody's already terrified, but no one's invading North Korea for a simple reason. It's got a nuclear capability. Iran is not stupid, just out of self-survival. They'll have nuclear weapons, but they're not going to use them. They know that with our 5,000, they would be incinerated if they use the nuclear weapon. They're using it for deterrence only. Again, this is not to say that Iran has any regime that I would ever support, but it's trying to understand to the extent stability is a virtue. That's why we got to be able to live with the idea of Iran having a nuclear weapon. It was thought, oh, you can never have a Muslim bomb. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. What, does the world fall in? No, it didn't. India has nuclear weapons. So you got some of the Hindu crazies in India and the Muslims in Pakistan. The world lives with them. It's a little bit unstable. The two countries really don't like each other, but they haven't used their nuclear weapons against adversaries. The only country in the world who's ever used nuclear weapons is the United States. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that weren't even necessary to bring the world to an end. So why are we imputing all these horrible, mischievous ideas to others? We're the ones who use the weapons. The others, they've tested them, haven't used them. But again, it shows what I would call the hypocrisy, the double standards. When you got double standards, you're not going to have any kind of equilibrium in foreign policy. I don't care. You have to have the same rules of the game for everybody. Otherwise, it becomes very unstable. And as soon as there's an opportunity to change the status quo by violence, you'll see it happening.
Is the world moving toward a wider global conflict, like Third World?
Well,
World War?
I think it's moving in that direction. We don't know for sure. I think what would show that we've now have basically World War III, if China takes the opportunity of the U.S. Example and invades Taiwan, that we obviously are supporting militarily, with huge weapon sales and training programs. And if Taiwan tacked in, Japan is committed to defending Taiwan, Australia, India has its own border troops with China, then we're taken to a new level. Because if now we have another superpower involved, it's not going to be the scale of Iran. China has hundreds, if not, and they're expanding fast, nuclear weapons. They're not going to accept, subjugation to the United States at all. And now, whether that happens, I don't know. But we're inching towards that direction, especially if we invade other countries. It may well. We've already threatened to do to Cuba what we've done to Iran. China could feel, why should we resist here? If you try to draw a comparison of the danger of Taiwan to China compared to the danger of Iran to the United States, Taiwan's way more dangerous to China than Iran could be the United States. They're 6,000 miles away. They don't have any weapons that can reach here. Taiwan, it's just 90 miles away. We have our own weapons. We have training exercises in Taiwan. We have the naval aircraft carrier fleets right in the South China Sea. So if you compare the justification for being nervous in a national security sense, China has much more justification over Taiwan than we had over Iran. You say, okay, here's our chance. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a real risk.
Several Bulgarian officials and businessmen are sanctioned under Magnitsky Act. What actually happens to individuals under these sanctions, and can the act be used strictly for anti-corruption purposes or also as political leverage?
Just for the audience, we in the United States enacted a law called the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. And the gist of the act says that the president is authorized to identify foreign officials who, among other things, are engaged in violations of internationally recognized human rights or large-scale corruption. There really isn't any due process. The president just decides on his own, but it can take recommendations from Congress or the State Department. And if you're listed, two things happen. One, you can't travel to the United States. Two, you can't do any business in the United States. And if you have any assets here, they're frozen. So it's kind of a stigma, if you will. It's kind of a scarlet letter. Sometimes it's meaningful, sometimes not. I would say the majority of people, officials who've been listed, they've never come to the United States anyway, so it's more political relations than otherwise. And so this is a way in which I think you can come off the Magnitsky list as well if there's been a change of circumstances. And I think that the listing is largely a political component because there are huge violations of human rights, if you will, like on Tiananmen Square in China. But if we want to get along with China, we're not going to list President Xi, as someone who's engaged in gross violations of human rights, although we know that he's engaged in violations every day. There's no dissent in China whatsoever. So the Magnitsky Act is largely a political tool. It's kind of a different diplomatic gesture, if you will. I don't think it's not like the French guillotine in the French Revolution. It's not pleasant if you're on the Magnitsky list because it's a stigma. At least it suggests the administration views you as someone hostile to internationally recognized human rights. But there's some people who can be listed even if it's totally unjustified. We have, you talked about Bulgarians, we have Mr. Trump has taken the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal and said, okay, Magnitsky, you're oppressing free speech. You indicted Prime Minister Netanyahu and Galev, the defense minister. And we've also put on the list the judges of the International Criminal Court. Said, wait a minute, these are not drug smugglers. Why are they on there? So it's a political instrument that's manipulated, I think, in some sense. It degrades the idea of violators of internationally recognized human rights because it's used in such an indiscriminate political way. It no longer is calibrated to separate out really bad actors from people who are rather innocuous, but just political gestures of the incumbent in the White House.
Thank you again.